So far, we've seen how the Obama administration, at least according to its critics, views the military in a different way. And those critics maintain this new attitude has already cost us. One thing we know the Obama administration has changed about the U.S. military: the words they use to describe certain activities. What'd you make of the fact that under this administration, the Pentagon was required to refer to military actions against Islamic terrorism as overseas contingency operations? Yeah. And that the actual acts of Islamic terrorism were to be referred to as man-caused disasters.
It completely exemplifies the approach of this administration that we're not even going to call our enemies what they are, which are Islamic terrorists.
Critics say such language is just part of the political correctness this administration requires of the military. Some think it's harmless. Others wonder.
At Fort Hood in Texas, on a clear day in 2009, Major Nadal Hassan, a doctor in the U.S. military, stood up on a table, shouted Allahu Akbar, and then began to fire. He killed 13 and wounded many others. It was a shocking event.
Staff Sergeant Alonzo Lunsford was one of the 32 American soldiers Hassan wounded that day.
As the laser went across my eyesight, I blinked. He discharged a weapon. The first round went in right here with my left eye, and it spun me around, and I hit the floor. He came up on me, he shot me again.
As Sergeant Lunsford lay still in a pool of his own blood, he watched Major Hassan train his weapon on 21-year-old Army Private Francesca Velez.
When he was getting ready to shoot her, she said, I'm pregnant, I'm pregnant. He fired anyway, and her last words was, oh, my baby, my baby, my baby.
Private Velez and her baby died that day. A horrific event, and some believe a preventable one.
Hassan, the Fort Hood terrorist killer, was communicating with Anwar al-Awlaki, the radical Islamist cleric who was then in Yemen.
In one of the 18 emails he exchanged with al-Awlaki, Hassan told him, I can't wait to join you in the afterlife. Lieberman, who led the Senate investigation into the Fort Hood massacre, suspects the blame may reside in the environment prevailing in Obama's military.
Political correctness can't lead you to close your eyes to a clear and present danger to the U.S. and to your colleagues in the U.S. Army.
That air of political correctness only thickened as the Obama administration insisted that what happened at Fort Hood was not an act of Islamic terrorism, but rather an example of, quote, workplace violence.
How could you say that a terrorist murdering 13 Americans was workplace violence? That's just ridiculous.
As for Sergeant Lunsford, he's still hurt by the government's lack of frankness.
What hurts more than the womb itself is a sense of betrayal, because a sense of betrayal is when you wake up, it's there. When you sleep, it's there. It's something that never leaves me. It never leaves me.
The divide between the Obama administration and many in the military only widened over the handling of the case of Army Private Bo Bergdahl. Bergdahl, a man the Obama administration labeled a POW, was released by the Taliban in exchange for 5 of their top leaders. The ceremony announcing his release was supposed to be a celebration.
This morning, I called Bob and Janny Bergdahl and told them that after nearly 5 years in captivity, their son Bo is coming home.
What was your reaction when President Obama hosted Bergdahl's parents at the Rose Garden ceremony?
Oh, I was pissed. Absolutely. In my view, Bergdahl should have never been labeled as a POW.
Did the men you served with consider him a soldier who had been captured or a man who had deserted his platoon?
We knew immediately that day the circumstances of his disappearance. He essentially had just deserted his post. We were mad as hell about it, but we didn't diminish any of our efforts to try to get him.
Waltz was ordered to lead Special Forces teams to search for Bergdahl.
It was the #1 priority in the entire theater of Afghanistan. And the Taliban immediately knew it. and they began feeding false information into our informant networks to try to bait us into ambushes. One of my special forces teams went into an Afghan compound where we thought Bergdahl might be, and the entire thing was rigged with explosives. By the grace of God, it didn't explode, but those were the types of situations that we continually found ourselves in night after night after night for months.
President Obama responded to the controversy by dispatching one of his top aides to praise Bergdahl.
He served the United States with honor and distinction.
When President Obama sends out National Security Advisor Susan Rice,
Right.
and she says that, in fact, Bo Bergdahl served the United States with honor and distinction.
Oh, I about threw my television out into the yard. Both me, his fellow platoon mates, my men, my fellow Green Berets that had nearly died looking for him were outraged. It also shows how tone deaf this White House can be to how military members think and feel. They take words like that, served with honor and distinction, very seriously.
Frankly, the White House probably should have made no statement whatsoever.
Leon Panetta told us he was dismayed by how the White House handled the Bergdahl case.
I don't mind, obviously, the effort and negotiations, but you don't just walk in and say, oh yeah, we'll give you 5 bad guys. These were individuals who killed, in many cases, our own soldiers. What assurance do we have that they're not going to wind up blowing up innocent Americans?
Demoralizing.
Yeah, incredibly demoralizing. And demoralizing to our men and women in uniform as well. When you're out there in harm's way and your commander-in-chief releases the Taliban's top 5 draft picks, it sends a pretty bad message to our troops and to our Afghan allies that we need to be serving alongside and encouraging.